And the last theory that I want to bring up, this has been quite an in-depth video because there's so many theories about this and so many different and competing angles that you can look at as well. So we're thinking about economic development not just in Western Europe and the US, as previous articles have mentioned, but we also need to step away from the European paradigm and see how economic growth or sustained economic growth occurred in Africa post 18th century, or whether it didn't occur in Africa post 18th century, and whether sustained economic growth happened, later than what had happened in Europe. And to think about the ways in which these sections of the world are interrelated and how perhaps economic growth in one area of the world was directly linked to, the stagnation or the destruction of the economy in another part of the world. And another point on this, drawing from our second video on post-colonial approaches, and also video 3 on how we also need to look at different kinds of historical approaches. Really important to think about history, not just in terms of a European paradigm, by saying, economic development in Europe is the main thing we're looking at. We're not going to look at economic development in Africa because we're not concerned with that. We're only concerned with what happened in Europe. It's important to think about the impact of slave trade back on Africa itself, rather than just prioritizing the viewpoint and perspective of Europe. So this is a picture from the African Development Bank Group, and you can look them up and see what kind of development work that they're doing on economic growth. And it's a hugely influential article by Nathan Nunn on the long-term effects of Africa's slave trade. And this is an interesting article. I think he was at Harvard while he was writing this, and it's been cited by over 1,000 people, which makes it very significant. You can see who has cited it and perhaps see whether you agree or disagree with what Nunn has eventually said. So we're talking about current underdevelopment, and methodologically, he uses data from shipping records and historical documents reporting slave ethnicities to construct estimates of the number of slaves exported from each country during Africa's slave trades. So in terms of primary evidence, that's really important. He's actually an economist. I think he's more of an economist than he is a historian. So interesting, again, perhaps to flag that in your essay and think about why, as an economist, he's come up with this argument, when other historians might be more or less suspicious of correlating economic change to the slave trade.